They drove the first stake in at dawn, a neat, arrogant line of new posts inching across the corner of my yard like a colonization. By noon, the white boards were up, straight and smug, their shadows swallowing the strip of my lawn that had been mine since I planted it with my own hands. My neighbor waved from his deck like a man who'd just annexed a small country. Survey error, he called over the fence, his smile perfectly practiced. Easy mistake. We'll fix it. Fix it. He had the audacity to believe I'd be placated by a shrug and a promise. He had the audacity to believe property was a polite suggestion. I stood there with my palms on my hips and watched a man in a polo shirt redraw the edge of my life with power tools and white paint. That pain is too particular to explain. Less the loss of land than the erasure of ownership. The quiet theft of the small things that made my house my home. The corner where the lemon tree leaned. The path my daughter once traced with chalk. The spot where my father had buried an old tin with photographs. They were not just taking soil, they were taking history, the kind that anchors you. I confronted him. He apologized in the tone of someone returning a library book late. Precise. Bored, rehearsed. You should have checked the markers, he said. The original peg was off by 3 feet. It's a simple correction. He ran a hand through his hair and offered me a beer like a penance. When I told him he'd planted his fence on my property, he tilted his head, the way men do when they try to see a problem from a comfortable distance. Call a surveyor, he said. We'll handle it through the proper channels. And then he added as an afterthought, or you could just move the shrubbery back. That night I sat at my kitchen table and felt my chest thin into a blade. Anger is a private architecture. It builds and sharpens if fed. I could have called a lawyer and launched, paper like artillery. I could have shouted and threatened, and become another loud person in a subdivision. Full of loud people. I did none of those things. I let the anger do what anger does best when it's cold and patient. I let it plan. The plan was not a single action, but a slow accumulation. A set of legal and aesthetic moves that would be impossible to fault on paper and impossible to ignore in sight. If he wanted to steal 3 feet of my land, I would respond in a language he understood. Structure, permanence, and spectacle. I would not raise a hand against his home or harm a person. I would raise something that could not be accused of malice, only admired and resented. I would build a castle. Not a toy turret, not a theatrical facade, but a wall, a thick, honest stone wall with a gate, an arched entry. A little watchtower with a narrow window that looked like stone eyes. I hired people with permits and renderings and stamped approvals. Every bolt, every plan, every depth mark was a document in triplicate. I made sure the foundation sat squarely on my property line, that every inch of mortar and stone belonged to me and me alone. He scoffed at the drawings at first, leaning over them with a condescending chuckle, but the chuckle faded when the permits arrived. It's your right, the planner told him when he asked. It meets setback, height, and aesthetic codes. The neighbor's smugness thinned into a different kind of fury, one that judges by optics. He called the board. He wrote an angry letter with the sort of polite venom that dissolves into petitions and signatures. Construction began. The stones arrived like a procession, each one heavy with intent. Men worked on scaffolds as the sun slanted over the lot and the wall rose, slow and beautiful, each course a deliberate beat. Stood at the edge of my property and watched it grow. Like a held breath released, the wall cast a shadow deeper than the fence ever managed. It made the garden behind it secret. It made the air on my side colder and sovereign. They tried politicians and bylaws and petitions. They hired a lawyer who scowled as if law were a blunt object rather than a careful scalpel. They demanded inspections. They threatened liens. Every attempt to stop it found the same answer. The paperwork was immaculate, the plans compliant, the property lines clear. The council told them to take the measurements and the complaints and the fury to court if they insisted. They were left with slogans and red-faced speeches. I had a foundation. When the wall was finished, it did more than block a view. It altered the geometry of the neighborhood's pride. That garden wall, stone and cold and final, stood like a moral punctuation, a sentence in the language of permanence. From his deck, his pool, his immaculate lawn, His veranda with string lights and an herb garden vanished into a silhouette. The neighbors began to notice what they had thought invisible, the way the view changed, the way the light on their evening drinks grew shorter. Where his fence once intruded into my yard, now his afternoon sun intruded into a wall. He paced his backyard like a man trying to find his face in a mirror turned to stone. The worst of it was not legal victory, nor even the humiliation. It was the slow unspooling of his certainty. Men like him count on the world revolving around their convenience. When that axis shifts, quietly, immovably, they fumble for noise and find only their own echo. He tried to petition again, to rally support, to call the wall an affront to community aesthetics. Some neighbors clucked their tongues and sent sympathetic texts. Others came to my gate with casseroles and old stories and a look that said they'd been waiting for someone to make a line and keep it. The castle was not ostentatious. It did not sport flags or gargoyles. It had dignity. Narrow door with a ring, a stone bench, a tiny turret where a single plant clung to life. It was a statement in granite, a refusal to be erased. At night, under the benign indifference of streetlights, it looked less like revenge than a monument. And monuments tend to reform memory. He sold the house 3 years later to someone looking for a view that wasn't cut by history. The new owner painted his fence white and kept his head down. Sometimes I think about the time before the stakes and the posts, when a line in the dirt was the only thing between us. Sometimes I think about how small things grow teeth when you let them. I never once stomped on his pride directly. I did not pour poison in his garden, did not wreck his car, did not call men to do him harm. I built instead, and the building was my reply. Slow, lawful, immovable. People asked if it was petty. People asked if it was cruel. They asked many questions that came from a place of comfort. My answer was the bench on which I sat in the late afternoons, a book in my lap, a cup of tea cooling in my hand, the castle wall at my back. The stolen 3 feet of grass returned to me not in words but in stone. If you were standing on my lawn the morning the posts went up, what would you have done? Like and subscribe for more stories.